right, thanks, Mary. Well, when I'm starting conversations with teams and projects on accessibility, I very often come across a very common pattern, and you might have seen it. They're saying, we're only building an internal application, and we have very tight deadlines, of course. Accessibility isn't the most important thing to us, and we don't want to slow down development. Now, this theme has two interesting parts to it. The first one being, accessibility isn't super important to us, which always makes me feel a little bit suspicious, because I truly believe, I really believe, every one of you, deep down in your hearts, you know accessibility is the right thing to do. But it's not only the right thing to do, it also generates value. And last but not least, in 235 days, the European Accessibility Act will come into full effect. That means companies within the EU will be legally required to make their products accessible. So next year in June, accessibility is important to us. It's not a topic. Accessibility has to be important to you. So we can end that discussion about the importance right here. Now, the second part of that theme is even more interesting. I don't want to slow down development. Well, that essentially shows how teams and developers are often thinking of accessibility. They kind of fear accessibility, and they maybe remember this one time they had to fix an accessibility issue that was caught in production, and it took them a very long time to fix it. They perceive accessibility as something that requires a lot of manual efforts to test, to verify, to research, and to check. And in short, the fear of accessibility actually makes teams deprioritizing it, which then in the end creates a cycle, because if you don't prioritize it, you only catch the errors when they're already in production, and that makes it harder to change. Now let's assume it's next year. What if I told you accessibility is a must? How can we actually ensure that we have a balanced and effective approach to that? Well, you all know the answer. We all know the answer. We have established patterns for that, and one pattern we're going to look in today is the testing pyramid. And I know it's not always a pyramid, but bear with me, we'll just stick with that for simplicity. The testing pyramid essentially helps us to acknowledge that there are certain kind of tests that require more effort and time compared to others. And it basically helps us to focus on automating as much as we can. And in short, it helps us to balance out costs and speed in our testing strategy. Now, when I'm thinking back at the project I've been on, in the context of accessibility, or looking at the project and the testing strategy through the lens of accessibility, I didn't really see a pyramid. It looked more like this. You might call it I don't know, maybe like an ice cream cone, a broken ice cream cone. Doesn't matter, let's just call it a broken something. A broken something. We have this huge cloud of manual tests at the top, and for a lot of teams, that actually is their way to testing accessibility. It's undefined, it's hovering around, people are doing it in their QA, but they're kind of randomly doing it. They're doing it sometimes, sometimes not, they're sometimes testing the keyboard navigation, sometimes not. It's not really defined. Now then there are teams that are more advanced in their journeys, and they start automating accessibility testing. Then they heavily focus on end-to-end tests. Which, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad thing, but I think we all know end-to-end tests are still expensive to run, and they're still giving us very late feedback. And then unit and static tests are very often ignored, or kind of forgotten in the context of accessibility. And of course, if we're looking at the balance again, we see in the context of accessibility, our testing strategy is not balanced. We have high costs and very slow feedback. And of course, you're looking at that and you know, okay, that's bad. How can we improve? Now let's take a look how we can rebuild our pyramid in the context of accessibility. The solid fundament and the base of our pyramid are static tests, even in accessibility. And static tests are awesome, I promise you. They give you feedback right at the time where you're about to change something, where you just have changed something, or when you're about to commit your changes. And they give you feedback at the time where you know what you've changed, and most likely you also know where to look for the problem. For accessibility, we have awesome tools like ESLint plugins or VS Code plugin, which is called the Accessibility Linter. And I promise you, they're super easy to set up. They're pretty much plug and play, so you install them, set them up, and you're good to go. I consider them always as a quick win, and for me, it's the first thing I do when setting up my environment. And here's one example of the linter. I added an image to my project, and it's directly screaming at me because I didn't add a text alternative. So it's telling me what to do, and I can write to it while I'm on coding. Now, the second layer are unit integration tests, and I clustered them together because in front-end, I sometimes find it hard to find the clear border between them. And they're the underdogs. They're the underdogs for accessibility testing, and I'll show you why in 2 examples.
If you're enjoying this, then LeadDev's got loads more to offer, and there's tons to explore.
So the reason I love LeadDev so much is they've got such a range of content on so many different topics in the world of engineering, leadership, and management.
So LeadDev helped a lot on building my own career, right? And it's great to also see how it's helping the new generation as well.
Make sure to sign up and join us at leaddev.com.
Here you see a test which might look familiar to you. We want to check if our page rendered correctly. So what we might be doing, we're rendering the home page, and then we're asserting that the text welcome is on the screen. It will work, but what we're doing is we're only checking if welcome is somewhere on the page. We're not checking if welcome actually is a heading. So the test could pass, but our screen reader could not recognize it. So instead of doing this, we can be much smarter in the way we're thinking of assertions. This is what we should do instead. So we're still rendering the page, but if you look at the expect statement, we're saying screen get by role, and here we're actually telling it we're looking for a heading of level 1 with the text welcome. So this way, we're not only ensuring that the text is visible, but we're also ensuring that assistive technologies will recognize our heading as a heading. And this works similar for all semantic elements. So it works for links, buttons, lists, text box, radio buttons, and so on. And you can see it's not a huge change. It's nothing new. It's just slightly changing your assertion. Another more complex example is, for example, this menu structure. You sometimes find yourself in a position where you create like a complex component, and you don't always follow the DOM tree in the way you want to navigate through it. So here, for example, we want to ensure that we're actually navigating through item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we also want our tab order to be in this way. But depending on how you implement it, it might happen that you either implement it in the way that you would tab 1, 3, 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this situation, whenever you find yourself in a position where you actually want to change the tab orders, or you have the feeling that something might get complicated in the structuring of my HTML, we can write a unit test for that. And that could look like this, for example. We're rendering the list or the menu. We're simulating a tab event, and then we're expecting that the correct element has the focus, and so on. We can tab through, check for focus, and so on. And that not only ensures accessibility, it also enables us to actually TDD building our component way more easier, because then we're already implementing accessibility in our approach. And last but not least, it's also very helpful as a documentation, because very often you don't document what the expected tab order is, but if you have a test like this, you can actually go back and look at the test and you see what you're expecting. Now the next layer are end-to-end tests, and I already told you this is where a lot of teams focus on, and it's okay. Like, it's a good starting point, and I get it why teams focusing on it, because they're also quite easy to set up. We have tools like the Xcore framework, which comes with integrations for Cypress, Playwright, whatever you need. And you can basically add one line to your end-to-end tests, which would, in this case, say Cypress, check accessibility, check li, and it will scan your page for accessibility issues and give you a nice table and a nice overview of the issues found, the impact level, and a description of those issues. And this is a very easy thing to do, to be honest, because it's also, again, setting it up, adding one line, and you get the overview. And this is also a nice way to add accessibility as a quality gate in your pipelines, because you can add it and you can, for example, fail if you find any accessibility issues, but you can also configure it in a way that you fail if there are critical issues. But for example, if you find something moderate, you might still want to pass the pipeline. And very important, manual tests are the tip of our pyramid. Previously, we've seen them hovering around as this undefined cloud, but it's important for us to acknowledge that in accessibility, we can only find roughly 60% of issues through automated testing. For example, we can only check that a text alternative is available, but it's super hard to automatically test if the text alternative actually makes sense, for example, for the image we're showing. And it's super important that everything we've seen now, it doesn't replace your manual test. It just narrows it down in catching the 60% as efficient we can, and scoping down what we actually have to manually test. And on that note, it's also super important to remember, you're not the user. You're not the user and I'm not the user. We can take as many trainings as we want, as many courses as we want. We're only testing our application through how we assume people are using it. But if you make real user tests, you might be surprised how people with disabilities are actually using your application. And it will change the way you think about it, trust me. So please keep in mind, everything we've seen, it does not replace your user tests and manual tests at all. It's just making the 60% way more efficient. So the one thing I want you to take away today is accessibility testing can be so little effort with such a great impact. Think back to the unit tests. We didn't introduce any new tool or anything. We didn't add many lines of code. But with a small shift in our mindset in how we think about testing, we're already ensuring accessibility. And if you want to read more on how you can bring it to your teams, there's a really nice handbook. You can find it on our website. And if you have any more questions, feel free to find me in the office hours. And I hope you make your applications more accessible. Thank you.